Hey folks, abortion is not an easy topic. In fact, it's one of the most contentious in the country. It's an issue that is divided by an invisible line that separates religion from science, the right from left, conservative from liberal, and to some, the good from evil. Now, I'm not here to debate the morality or legality of abortion. The latter has been decided since 1973. What I am here is to discuss the modern manifestation of the debate and the tactics that are used by both sides to advance their agenda. I'm going to add some personal context to the story and hopefully demonstrate two things. So first and most important, that a few people can stand up and have a major effect on legislation. And second, and much less optimistic, in an issue where one side is fighting for personal rights and the other side is fighting to undermine the separation of church and state, which makes such rights possible, there may be no compromise. I'm implicitly asking, how do you meet in the middle? Now, some of you may wonder what qualifies me to give a talk on such a topic, which kind of leads me to the elephant in the room, that I'm just another white guy talking about women's reproductive rights. History has shown us the importance of solidarity in movements, from women's suffrage to civil rights to most recently LGBT rights. But this is deeper. My name is Christopher Englese, and I'm an award-winning documentary filmmaker. I recently spoke before the National Abortion Federation due to the subject and success of my film, Political Bodies. I am a co-founder and president of Bike JC, which is a Jersey City-based advocacy group, and I'm also passionate about a woman's right to choose. I thought my journey into this topic started in 2012, when my inner voice was nagging me to kind of grab a camera, drive down to Virginia, and spend the next year and a half making a documentary on this topic. But the more I thought about it, I realized just how far back my connection to this issue goes. Before I go any further, I should give us a quick history lesson on abortion in the US. Few people don't know, but abortion was actually legal during the colonial period in 18th century, at least up until a woman experienced quickening, which is when she felt the life moving within her. After that, there were 40 laws passed between 1860 and 1880, prohibiting a woman to have an abortion except to save the woman's life. And that remained the status quo until there was this sudden push for change that came out of the 60s and 70s called women's liberation. Now, that debate led the Supreme Court to decide a number of cases, and then, of course, Roe v. Wade in 1973.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The ruling said the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belonged to the woman and her doctor, not the government. Thus, the anti-abortion laws of 46 states were rendered unconstitutional.
The 80s and the 90s witnessed a large rise of the Christian right. Protests outside clinics became commonplace, and healthcare professionals were targeted. They were targeted with bombs, poisons, and assassinations. I believe that these actions by extremists led to the largest pro-choice majority in the history of the US. But that would all change as the pro-life side began to reevaluate their tactics. After taking back the House of Representatives in 2010, the Republican Party began what some have called a concerted attack on a woman's right to choose. They passed the most restrictions ever, 92 in 2011 alone. Now, these restrictions include informed consent laws, wait periods, mandatory ultrasounds, personhood amendments. Think about this. In the majority of states in the US, a woman's ovaries are more regulated than guns. It is easier to buy a gun than to access a safe, legal medical procedure. The three main restrictions that Virginia faced were the Personhood Amendment, the Ultrasound Mandate, and trap laws. Let me expand on them a little bit. In 2012, State Senator Bob Marshall, who I had the privilege to interview, debate for an hour, proposed a personhood bill that defined the beginning of personhood at fertilization, aka when sperm meets egg. Senator Marshall, a staunch Catholic, believes that personhood bills will and can be used to overturn Roe v. Wade. He does not see the danger or the unconstitutionality in practicing his religion at the legislature. He also told me that abortion should be illegal in cases of rape because, and I'm quoting here, A rape pregnancy is rare because women have a way of shutting their bodies down. I don't know what that means. He even thinks it should be illegal in cases of incest because, and this is a doozy, quote, it's sometimes voluntary. I have one more. He believes that disabled children are sometimes, quote, God's vengeance on women for having an abortion. I hope I never meet his God, or his science teacher, to be honest. I think it's really important to understand what Senator Marshall and others are proposing. All protections that all of us here in this room enjoy under the 14th Amendment would be granted to a couple of cells. That includes inheritance rights, rights on taxation, and there's no one knows how these laws would be implemented or what the unintended consequences might be of these laws. The unintended consequences, they run the gamut from the silly to the profound. For example, how do you decide custody over frozen embryos? But most importantly, what does this mean for birth control, in vitro fertilization, and abortion? Question: if life begins at conception, do certain forms of birth control and abortion kill a person? Next up is the ultrasound mandate. It requires every woman to receive an ultrasound prior to having an abortion. Supporters of the bill argue that this test provides information, such as gestational age and sizing. But here's why this gained national attention. Most abortions happen in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy, and you cannot see those things from jelly on the belly. So what do you have to have? A transvaginal ultrasound. The procedure was state mandated regardless of whether or not the doctor thought it was necessary. Senator Marshall admitted that the bill's intention was to, quote, get the woman to see the baby, and she might change her mind. But the thing is, that is rarely said publicly. Instead, it is cloaked in science, and it's said to be done for the health and safety of the mother. Opponents of the bill argue that this is just another way to shame women. Virginia Senator Janet Howell, who I interviewed in the film, sponsored a bill that required men to get a digital rectal examination and cardiac stress test prior to being prescribed Viagra. That got a lot of attention. The rectal bill exam failed by only 2 votes, but the message was clear: gender equality. Of all the laws I've mentioned or described, TRAP laws, which is an acronym for Targeted Regulations Against Abortion Providers, have been the most effective. The Virginia bill stated that abortion clinics must be regulated like hospitals that were built in 2010. Most of these clinics have been in operation since 1973. If you couldn't meet the guidelines, then you'd have to close. That meant that only 9 of the 23 clinics in Virginia would be able to remain open. No other comparable medical practice received this kind of intense scrutiny. If this was truly about safety, why not include dentist's office? Why not include plastic surgery offices, urologist? All of these do tests that are much more risky than an abortion. TRAP bills have passed in a number of states, most recently in Texas, and all too often they have the same effect. Health facilities must close. This is a woman's health issue. These clinics provide much more than abortion access. This is about access to good, safe, and affordable health care. These clinics provide much more stuff. Let's look at Planned Parenthood, for example. 3% of Planned Parenthood services are abortion services, just 3%. With a focus on family planning, they provide birth control, sex education, treatment of STDs. Equally important are the hundreds of thousands of Pap tests and mammograms that they provide each year. These tests save lives. It was late spring in 1986. I was 6 years old at the time, and probably really excited about summer vacation. It's also when my mother was diagnosed with cervical cancer. I was rather young and quite sheltered from a lot what was happening, but it affects you. Sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously, but it's there. After discovering the tumor, my mother's doctor decided that she needed a radical hysterectomy. which is the removal of her cervix and ovaries. But here's the point of this story. She's a cancer survivor. A survivor because she had her yearly Pap test, and that test came back abnormal. A test which these clinics are providing was able to discover my mother's cancer early enough. I firmly believe that you do not provide for the public health by closing down health facilities. Protests of the regulations grew across the United States. While the message was the same, the style of protest has changed since 1973. One modern manifestation of the protest uses humor. Humor allows the discussion of a controversial issue through parodies, satire, and sarcasm, really. Women from Virginia, aka Cooch Watch, took a well-known melody, they added some political lyrics, and created something humanizing in the face of dehumanizing legislation. The next tactic is a bit more controversial, but arguably as effective. Many believe these regulations are meant to shame women about their decision. One way to take the shame out of the equation is to come out, if you will, about having an abortion. These women are our mothers, sisters, our friends, our lovers. Think about this. 1 in 3 women will have an abortion by the age of 45 in the US. 1 in 3. What would happen if everyone just stood up all at the same time and said, I had an abortion? I think we'd have a really honest and open discussion about the topic. I was 18 and in my first year of college when I got a girl pregnant. It was terrifying. I remember waiting for the test results was particularly nerve-wracking. I never doubted whose choice it was, but I definitely knew that we weren't ready. We weren't dating. We both lived with our parents. We were too young, we just started school, and we were clearly irresponsible. No one comes to this decision lightly. I remember it was cold that morning and it had snowed a little bit the night before. We drove into Manhattan. The Holland Tunnel was still $7 at the time. And we went to a clinic in the West Village. The room was quiet, it was awkward, but it was warm. We waited, and then eventually they called her in. I remember being surprised how quick the procedure was. We didn't really talk too much after, except she turned to me and told me that she was okay. I guess we didn't really have much else to say until now. The protests in Virginia had lasting results in Virginia and nationally, something I like to call the Virginia effect. 2 weeks after the passage of the transvaginal ultrasound bill, the protests attracted so much national attention that Virginia Republicans were spoofed on everything from Saturday Night Live to David Letterman. The pressure became too much to bear, and eventually the transvaginal ultrasound was dropped from the bill. Immediately after, transvaginal ultrasound bills in Alabama, Idaho, Ohio, and Pennsylvania were also all scrapped. The Virginia Personhood Amendment would come to a vote, and that too would fail. Shortly after, personhood amendments in Colorado, Mississippi, Oklahoma, and Florida would also go down. All that remained were the trap laws. The only way that the pro-choice side would be able to stop these laws from coming into effect is if they denied the Attorney General, Ken Cuccinelli, who is the Cooch in Cooch Watch, if they denied him the governor's mansion. And that is exactly what they did almost 1 year ago to the day. Why did Ken Cuccinelli lose the governorship? Because he lost the women's vote by 11 points. But it was not easy. While marching on the Capitol building, the protesters were met by a large police force in full riot gear. They were also met by guard dogs, helicopters, assault rifles, and what I can only describe as a gentleman in full military gear hiding in bushes. And these men were placed all around where the protest was happening, literally hiding behind bushes in that outfit, where 1,000 women, just 1,000, were protesting for their reproductive rights. Many were arrested, but they did not back down. They refused to be intimidated. Political Bodies won Best Documentary Feature at the 2013 Austin Film Festival. It was also an official selection at 7 more. Virginia became a national blueprint on how to mobilize and combat abortion restrictions. We, the film crew, we had a front row seat to a countrywide movement where women stood up and demanded control over their reproductive destiny. We had the easy part. We just turned on cameras. But we were privileged to capture the grassroots organization that began a nationwide discussion on autonomy and reproductive rights. We documented history. We know the tactics, and hopefully we understand what is at stake. We need to combat voter apathy and voter suppression. We need a revolution in participation of the political process, no matter what side of the political spectrum you land. Stand up, be heard, be counted. Stop believing that your vote doesn't matter. There was a national election just this past Tuesday. 2/3 of the country did not show up to vote. Out of the ones who did vote, only 12% were aged 30 and under. 12%. It is our turn, our generation's turn to lead. Our turn to choose a path through this brave new world. Some battles will win, others will lose, and many are more to come. My film is just one example, but I believe progress can rarely be stopped and is always worth fighting for. Join me. Thank you.